In simple terms, it's to be happy. The precepts are part of the path. In the path, Buddha said, I teach two things. I teach dukkha, and I teach the end of dukkha. I teach suffering, stress, discomfort, however you want to translate that, and the end of it. And the end of it is simply happiness. It's being happy. We chant the precepts because it makes us happy. And it works in two ways, because by chanting the precepts, they're antidotes for our ill will. They're antidotes for the things that become selfish and that actually cause us harm. And they're also intentional expressions of kindness towards others, towards other beings. And if you reflect on your life and think times when people have given you something really nice, or when you've given other people something really nice, it's the giving that makes us happy. Receiving doesn't really make us happy in the same measure as giving makes us happy. So the precepts work on these two levels, or in these two directions. And they are limited by our ability to see clearly. Because everybody, I say that, the vast majority of people, all the time, are acting in ways to make themselves happy. It's just, most of the time when we do that, it's just not very skillful. We're doing our best. We're just not seeing clearly. And so we're doing things that we think make us happy, things based on greed, things based on short-term sensual pleasures, things based on some form of escapism. And we think these make us happy, and they actually don't. If we look more deeply, they really don't make us happy. So the precepts work in these two directions, but they are limited by our ability to see. And we see more clearly, like you did this morning, sitting and meditating. That's about slowing down, so we can see more clearly. So there's dark alleys in this practice that, unless we're careful, we can slip down these dark alleys. And this meditation can take us down one of those dark alleys if we're not careful. Because there is, what happens when we meditate, things slow down, we see more clearly. It's like, aha, I get it now. Dropping off body and mind. Like, there's no self here. I get it. Now I can see the interconnectedness of all beings. Voila! I'll act in a way that makes me happy. But most, if not all of us, have heard many horror stories about all these enlightened teachers who behave in predatory ways and cause an awful lot of harm. A lot of it's sexual misconduct. Some of it is financial exploitation, taking assets from people, which is, we just chanted, not to take what is not freely given. So encouraging people to support an organization or to support a teacher beyond their means is not really freely given. So there are all these ways that people who are supposedly these wonderful enlightened teachers can act in ways that cause harm. And Gareth's view of this is what's happening is their practice is dropping short. They're not getting all the way there. This is conditioned. Everything except nirvana, everything except final release, but that final everything's gone. Everything is conditioned. And as long as there is conditioning, we're going to act out of that conditioning. We can move into these wonderful places with our practice where we just kind of get into a very natural flow. One of my revered teachers, I've never met and never will because he passed away, he's Nisargadatta, is a Hindu mystic and self-realized individual who died in, I think, the 1980s. Nisargadatta means, I don't speak the language, but crudely translates as union with the natural way, something. But it's this idea of the natural way. And the natural way is where there's no ego interfering with what happens. So we get into this flow. And intuition starts landing and working, and it's just this very natural way of being. It's like one of the Harry Potter movies. I have no idea which one, but in one of the Harry Potter movies, he ends up getting this potion, which is a luck potion. And he's supposed to, the other kids want him to go do something. He says, I think I'll go see, I can't remember, the guy who rides the motorbike. I think I'll go see him. And so he does. And everything just happens because it's this luck potion. He's just in flow. Things just move around exactly right. And that is a real experience that can happen to us when we get out of our own way and we can get into this sense of flow. But if we're doing that within this conditioned body, the conditioning of this body is still showing up. So it's not an unconditioned flow. If you study the neurology of free will, it's something along the lines of brain starts firing away, and then I make a decision to do something about half a second later, and then about a quarter second after that I do that. So free will isn't quite what we think it is. Long-term free will saying, I'm going to take on a daily meditation practice. I mean, there's lots here that it's not absolute black and white like that. But the point to take out of that is, this conditioned body acts in ways that really aren't visible to us. In fact, quite the opposite. They're happening in ways that are completely counterintuitive, because our mind plays around all of this and shapes the world to how it wants it to be, so we miss so much stuff. So it's really, really easy to not realize the extent to which our conditioning is showing up, and that we're acting out of conditioning, and in doing so, as with these teachers I'm talking about, we cause harm to ourselves and harm to other people. We increase suffering rather than reduce suffering. So the practice, we talk shamatha and vipassana, slowing down, stopping and seeing. We do have free won't. We may not have free will, we have free won't. We can definitely not do something. Right? And that's what this practice is based on. All our precepts are written in the negative in the first instance. I vow not to. I will, what do I say here? I'll not condone others. So there's a stopping here, there's a seeing, say, oh, let's stop right there. So the first step is to stop and then slow down and see. And the second is vipassana, which is insight, which is that seeing. And the process that takes us through is all these conditioned acts. If we see that when we slow down enough to start seeing them happening, we can bring them up into our conscious awareness. And once they're in conscious awareness, the wiring changes. We can rewire the brain. The brain is the frontal cortex is amazing because it allows us to literally rewire our brain. So once we bring all these conditioned behaviors to the conscious, we can stop them all, and then once we've got that new pattern, then becomes a new habit that drops back. So there's reciting the precepts in our sitting practice, this stopping and seeing work together to allow us to completely decondition this system. And the deconditioning goes really, really, really deep. The deepest condition is thinking there's a me here. We can talk about evolution, right? Evolution, evolution, this all happens because we're supposed to survive and so forth. But evolution is blind. Evolution doesn't know there's a me here. It's like gravity or electromagnetic fields. It just happens. There's no me in the middle of that. It's just, on this planet, it's 3.8 billion years of just incremental conditioning of stuff. And somehow or other, out of all that, I show up thinking there's a me in the middle of it. Evolution isn't about being happy. Evolution is just this process that happens. So this deconditioning can go really, really deep and ultimately recognize the complete illusion of thinking there is this thing called a me, and take that out of the conditioned system. So then we really are in natural flow. There is no conditioning around that. And then we really are in a place where all that's left is the precepts, because that's what we were using to decondition. Not causing harm. Because the world is full of people like all of you, like me, who think we're beings. And because we think we're beings, we're causing ourselves suffering. When we cause ourselves suffering, we can't do anything other than cause suffering to other people or other beings. So when we go through that deconditioning properly, what's left is simply the precepts in action. So that's why we chant the precepts. We chant the precepts to reduce suffering, to be happy, to help other beings be happy. And we marry that with our contemplative practice, our stopping and seeing, so that the precepts can work more and more deeply and can bring that happiness for us and others to just these ever deeper levels. So thank you for chanting the precepts with me this morning, because when we do this together, it is so much more powerful. Those are my thoughts and words. What do you all think? Questions, comments? Bruce?
Yeah, evolution seems to have resulted in some happiness, but a lot of this individuality, thinking that we are something, and then on a mass scale has resulted in all sorts of unhappiness, war, etc., killing each other. Why do you think it evolved that way instead of there not being a self, and we're happy and we love each other?
So I'm going to answer that obliquely, because I don't know. I'm not going to pretend I know. But I think that I'll turn the question around, because the question I think becomes to look at evolution, which is not something we really understand. Consciousness, in evolution we're dropping right back into this dualistic story. It's a very powerful and wonderful story, which gives rise to this, and the internet, and all the watches and cell phones everybody's carrying on, the machines that made all these cushions and these fabrics, the distribution systems, software, ERP, all the rest that allowed everything in here to go through warehouses and manufacturing. Science is, what we've done with science is amazing, but it is a story. It's just a dualistic frame of reference. And science doesn't even have a good definition of consciousness. It doesn't know what it is. Quantum mechanics, which is the best description of the world we've got right now, actually isn't the whole description of the world, because it's not unified with gravity. And it doesn't describe 75% of all energy and 25, it's like, I think the number's like 95% of all energy and matter isn't yet known. So science is very limited. And similarly, evolution, we anthropomorphize stuff. So we look at evolution as a story that describes how and why we come here, with a preconception of what we are, and that we are the center of the story. Mm-hmm. But evolution doesn't care whether there's a me here. Evolution's not about this. It's the best we can do. And there's another piece of it, which is you look at individuals and you say, well, is that nurture or nature? So, environment, right? So, it's not a completely satisfactory answer, but there's deeper questions about what we mean and what we think of when we talk about evolution. Goran, I had a feeling you'd come in here, sir.
Well, I'm personally not much into precepts, but first time I saw them in this form and heard them in this form, and one thing that just occurred to me, they are kind of like based in current societal structure.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for instance, don't steal.
Mm-hmm.
So animals steal from each other when they're hungry, the food, whatever, that's natural, right? And then, like, Native Americans didn't have property, right? And now some other society comes and creates the notion of property. that creates a notion of stealing. So this is mine, you better not steal it, that's not moral, you know. Now, I have 1,000 times more than you and you're hungry, but you're a moral person if you don't take my 1,000 times wealth because you're hungry. That's not good enough excuse, you know. So it kind of keeps the societal inequality in place if you obey all these moral rules in the situation when there's great inequality. You just label it stealing, you know, like, and you can also see it as maintaining the dominance of, you know, the wealthy. So like, there are a bunch of things. And also, how do these precepts go with compassion? Like, what does it mean to condone? If somebody is suffering and they take a drink to ease their suffering, who am I to judge it, you know? That's kind of another question I have. So for me, wisdom and compassion actually, for me, it's a better guide in life than some kind of formula. Like never have a drink or something. There's some thoughts, I don't know, any of this is true, it's just food for thought. I'm curious what you think.
So all of these are all of the teachings are just tools. That's all they are. They're tools. Buddha said, I teach two things. I teach suffering, I teach dukkha and the end of dukkha. And one of our problems is we land on a translation of dukkha and we think we know what it means, but actually it's a word that was used 2,500 years ago that had a contextual and a linguistic and a cultural meaning back then, and it has many different... So it's a far more complicated story. But for simple purposes, let's just say stress and the end of stress. That's all I teach. How do we end stress? Wisdom and compassion. Wisdom is seeing clearly. Compassion for self and other is living in a place of love, which is what the three pure precepts will say. But that's kind of hard to live, because it's not, where's the guide? So Buddha then showed up and taught, there's, thousands of pages, the teachings of the Buddhist canon. And these were all teachings to individuals or small groups of people, teaching people where they are. So where this person is, where Amit is right now, where Winnie is right now, this is what would be helpful. This is what would be helpful for Karen. So Buddha would show up and teach where that person is to help them move down a path. Right? So the precepts, of course they're going to be written in the language of modern society, because that's where we all are. We start there. How do we live within this environment to cause less suffering to ourselves and others? Well, you start by looking at your existing frame of behavior and you start refining them. And taking what's not freely given, people's liberty, people's rights to equality. I mean, you can look at that. So we need to be very discerning as we look at how we apply the precepts. And as our wisdom grows, as we sort of settle in and we see more clearly, the precepts take on deeper and deeper meaning. It's a very obvious next step. It's not the final step, but a very obvious next step will be do not take what's not freely given. Well, there's nothing to take. There's no thing there to take. There's nobody to give it and there's nobody to take it. So what does that really mean? It does mean something. It just doesn't mean what we thought it meant in that original construct. So understanding of the precept evolves with our practice. Until eventually, when we have really mastered it, we can let go of the precept. But it's a tool for us to use and grow with, and to use in community so that we can see it, refine, and we can work with others and talk about it, and help ourselves see how we can use it in ever more subtle and clearer ways. Karen?
I have so many thoughts, I hope I can organize them. But I really like Goran's challenge to the precepts, because it did add a different perspective. And I think a lot of us at times have, felt like it's akin to the Ten Commandments, and, it can be moralistic, and some people can use moralistic thinking as a weapon, against others, and not be very compassionate. And it actually can promote being judgmental. But like Goran said about who am I to judge someone having a drink to ease their suffering. But in terms of condoning and judging are kind of two separate things.
Yes.
You know, you can be very non-judgmental, very compassionate, understanding of that, you know, without saying you're wrong, you know, but kind of providing the space, you know, the acceptance for the suffering, but maybe not, you know, the method, you know, offering alternatives. So I think it, you know, kind of comes down to a personal analysis of what do these terms mean. How can I not be moralistic in my application of the precepts? And I was also thinking of stealing, like you're talking about evolutionary thinking and psychology and all. Robert Wright is kind of your dude if you want to learn more about that. Why Buddhism is True is really an outstanding reference. And one of the things he does address is how some practitioners cross that line as far as sexual indiscretion and all. It's pretty known fact, and that does kind of come with the territory as we stop feeling like there's a me and a you, and there's, you know, these boundaries are loosened. You know, it's very easy to feel so close that that line can be crossed, you know. In terms of stealing, you know, those who connect in inappropriate ways in that respect may still hold very fast to the idea of not taking other people's stuff, stealing from them. But again, on a personal level, stealing, you know, in the truest sense, isn't just about property, you know. That's a good start. But, you know, if you're a practitioner, you know, with very open boundaries, teaching and sharing and attracting, you know, interested practitioners, you know, you could be stealing their energy, their attention. It could be feeding one's ego, and that's a theft also, you know. So again, the precepts can become very, very personalized, you know, as we analyze, you know, what does this mean? But I do understand, like, they can be sort of guides, but they don't have to be like dictates where we use it as a weapon. So
and it's really important they're
my
not.
thoughts. Yeah.
One thing you said that I want to come back to, because it's actually something Goran talked about as well that I didn't address, and now I forgot what I was going to say. So the precepts are for us and for our practice. We don't apply the precepts to anybody else. The precepts are never a measure by which somebody else should behave. They're always for us to use about our behavior. There's a move here though, and traditionally the precepts are always about do not take what's not freely given, do not engage in sexual misconduct. They're always about regulating your own behavior historically. Thich Nhat Hanh made a big shift, and as you know, Thich Nhat Hanh, one of the many wonderful gifts Thich Nhat Hanh gave the world was his form of engaged Buddhism. Mm-hmm. And part of that form of engaged Buddhism was to really reflect on inequality and injustice in the world and how we interact with that. So the Plum Village precepts, they're mostly along the lines of I vow not, and they're very long, so they're a long paragraph describing what theft is. So there'll be a long paragraph talking about what taking what is not freely given is, and this is some of the things that here come out of that, but they're much longer, much more descriptive. And then the commitment, the vow is, I won't do this, and I will prevent others from doing this, which is a very strong statement. Now, the place it comes from is a place of recognizing we are all interconnected and we are all in the world together. So it's recognizing I can't do this alone, and that ultimately, if I am to relieve my own suffering, I can only do it with if I'm relieving other people's as well. I can't do this alone. And to see clearly, if you see clearly, you do see the suffering of others, and it's kind of hard not to move into compassion for that suffering, wanting other people to be happy and seeing more clearly what that means without being arrogant to sort of impose. So I think the move to bring others within the sphere and recognize that there is behavior going on out there that is causing suffering, and I can't just ignore that, is important. How we put language around that is complicated. And as you said, Karen, and as I said when I was responding to Goran, there's a deep responsibility on us to exercise discernment as we apply these precepts. So these are frames, and how do we really act within this, knowing what it's really about? And being very attentive to the ego traps along the way. Anand.
Yeah, Gareth, I was about to say the same thing. What you were saying, it's about the precepts are for us rather than it's to me as well. It's a training tool, so it's not a hard set in stone like what is stealing means. It's how I see the stealing, right? Even what I'm doing to the the earth or whatever, what are the way I'm the treating others also sometimes stealing, right? So it's more for I see as a training for me rather than judgmental, like Karen was mentioning. So that helps a lot as I practice more and more. Before I was just taking as a hard and fast rule, but now over a period of time, it's the definition changed to me. So just wanted to share that. Thank you.
I'll add something else to this, which is many of you know I spent a couple of weeks out with Tanisra Bhikkhu at his monastery in California last year, and he is one of the most profound of the current generation of Theravada teachers. I mean, his insight, his knowledge of the texts, and his wisdom are just profound. But there's an edge of him which which I think I need to take with a considerable pinch of salt, because he's a fundamentalist, really. And there's an edge in a lot of Buddhism. It's just acknowledge it's out there. Doesn't take away the enormous, wonderful things that I take from his teachings, but there's a piece here to be careful with. But here's the way it shows up on this. He is a literalist on the precepts. In the commentaries on the Theravadan canon, what does not killing mean? What does taking life mean? Well, if something's smaller than a certain size, it doesn't count as life. Plants don't count as life. There's a clear black and white definition of what counts and what doesn't. And his view and his teaching on this, at least what I heard as his teaching on this, is having that set of absolute certainty about what is permitted and what's not permitted. You hear it from somebody who you deeply trust, whose wisdom you deeply accept, and then you know exactly what to do. It gives freedom. So that's not what I teach, right? It's not. That's not what I'm talking about here. But I'm putting that out there to acknowledge there is that view as well. And I can see value in that. I really can see value in that view. I can see a lot of safety and a lot of comfort for people. There is caution with it because it can lead to what you were talking about in particular, Karen. It can lead to blindedness, and it can lead to causing stuff. But I can see some wisdom in it too. Bruce.
Yeah, well, I'll share my personal experience, but first let me say, as far as killing is concerned, I have my line, which is things that are harmful to myself or my property. I don't have any inhibition about killing, or at least very little. That usually is like termites and some kinds of ants. Fire ants and stuff. But what I was really going to say was my experience in following the precepts has been that it makes me much happier, and I realize that by not following the precepts earlier in my life, I made a lot of other people very unhappy. And it goes the whole thing. Well, I haven't killed any higher, anything bigger than. But lying. I mean, I don't even tell white lies anymore.
Yeah.
I mean,
Just-
I feel good. Other people are not deceived. I think they feel better. And let's see, what's next on the list? Well,
That's enough.
I
We
can
get
jump,
the point. We
it's,
get the point.
I stopped drinking not for any other reason. I had for medical reasons, not for anything else. But
It just makes you happy.
makes much happier. I mean, the sexuality thing. I mean, I realized all the harm I did earlier in my life, and just being conscious of that was a big step.
Yeah.
Stopping the behavior. So anyway, I think it really has benefits both for myself and for others. So
And the other thing I'll add to that, thank you, because that's personal testimony is, absolutely. And I suspect, Bruce, that as the years have, as you have spent more time in the practice, your understanding has deepened, and you've applied them in ever more subtle ways and become even more happy. Fair statement?
yeah,
There we go.
I
Don't listen to what I say. It's the evidence, the walking truth. So nobody on Zoom has
Yeah,
spoken. Yes, Rosemary.
I kept putting on the unmute because I can't find whatever, I can't even turn it on.
Oh, you can't turn your camera on.
Right,
So,
yes, but anyway, that's my project for the next 50 years, right? So when you say, it's all an illusion in a way, back to Goran's question, and maybe this was covered when I accidentally turned the whole thing off, but so you have the impoverished masses, and you have the rich man who just has his silo full of grains, and so if all property is, well, to paraphrase Proudhon, property is illusion. Property is not theft, property is illusion. And it's very wicked of the silo owner to keep everything in the fruits of these people's labor. So, but they would be stealing technically if they were even picking up the grain that fell off the trucks on the way into the silo. I mean, maybe I'm being too literal minded, but you did say it was illusion.
Yeah, and this is where the language of the precepts, we start where we are. We start with a frame of reference that we all understand, but we have to allow that frame of reference to grow as our wisdom grows. And the legalistic system where picking up the grains as they fall off the back of the truck is a legal system that was written by the rich white guy who owns all the stuff to keep it. So it's a system that is written precisely to take. I mean, this is Marxism 101. It's taking the work of the masses, the labor, right?
Well, suppose they go into the silo.
Well, no, but let me finish, Rosemary. So we're commodifying labor in the Marxist example. So it's simply what is taking?
What is
And taking disproportionately resources that are better used and should be shared is a taking. We've got a system that is built on taking what is not freely given. I mean, the building power plants in rural Georgia, backing up, and pig factories as well, backing up on poor African American communities is a taking of environmental liberty. We do this all the time. We don't call it taking because of the way the law is written. But in the construct that we're thinking about here, we've got to look carefully at what taking means.
But
So
so
this needs to bring discernment to bear.
This seems swishy.
It is. It is. And that's why there is no black and white rule here. Each of us have to figure this out for ourselves. Last comment from Karen. And then
Okay.
we'll wrap this up.
I think that the precepts probably, I'm just speculating, evolved out of individuals already on a path to enlightenment. Because I think that these ideas surface very, very naturally. You know, it wasn't someone, you know, this overlord who says this is, it wasn't necessarily an attempt to control. It may have, you know, turned into that. But like you were saying about killing the insects, you know, so if you're used to stomping on water bugs or what have you, you may very well find that you start, you know, deeply meditating, that you can't do that, you know. So if you had someone who is also steeped in the same sort of practice at your side, they might nudge you and say, yeah, don't step on the water bug, you know? So it's like it evolves naturally. You know, yes, the language starts to look like it's very controlling, and of course our natural resistance, you know, to that is going to surface. But I think, you know, most of these ideas would come up no matter what, you know, with any individual who's practicing sincerely.
I want to say one thing and then we need to wrap up because we're over time. One thing to respond to that is it's back to we culturally we have the strengths in culture where we resist rules. But if we take these not as rules but as guidelines for how to live a virtuous life, let's say, and be open to the freedom that can come for us and for others, if we actually intentionally start trying to live a virtuous life, it takes on a different valence. So it's not, I would never tell somebody follow this because it's what it says here. But to take this as, maybe this will help me cause less harm, maybe understand this a little bit better, and to be open to the freedom that brings, which is what Bruce described in his life. Anyway, thank you all. We need to wrap up. Let's go to Anand. We will save some beings here. So if you go back, this is going to be on the inside. Yes, it's on the green cards. No, it's not on the green. It's on the inside back cover of your book.
Beings are numberless. I vow to awaken them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Beings are numberless. I vow to awaken them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Beings are numberless. I vow to awaken them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it.
Announcements. Okay, so